British besties. My name is Brittany. This is Rescues and Reads. Thank you so much for joining me here today. If you are new, welcome. I'm so glad you're here. And if you're already subscribed, as always, I appreciate your continued support. Thank you for returning to another video. Today we are here to talk about all of the books that I read in January. Now, I have a new idea for how I want to do wrap-ups going forward on my channel. And my intention was, of course, to start with January, but there were quite a few things that happened in January that quite literally physically prevented me from completing the wrap-up style that I wanted to. So we are here with just a traditional sit-down style wrap-up, and I hope that's okay with you. Now, January was definitely an interesting reading month. My reading was definitely affected by all of the things going on, and I didn't necessarily love a lot of the books that I picked up, unfortunately. So I'm definitely hoping that the rest of my reading year is a lot stronger. So the very first book that I read in the month of January, I'm just going to quickly mention because that was Strange Sally Diamond by Liz Nugent. This was the patron pick for the month of January, and for my patron picks, my thoughts and feelings on the story are exclusive to my Patreon, so I'm not going to really be doing a full review here. I will just say that I gave this book a 3.5 stars. The next book that I read in the month of January was a book called Call the Canaries Home by Laura Barrow. Now, I think this book was originally put on my radar when I was still doing monthly new release videos, and I believe that this was one of them. And I was originally intrigued by this book because it seemed like it was going to be right up my alley. I thought that it was going to be very atmospheric because it was set in very rural Louisiana. It was like a small town mystery slash family drama, and it definitely seemed like something that I could enjoy. And unfortunately, this was such a mediocre read. Honestly, now at the beginning of February, I really cannot tell you much about it because I don't remember much about it. I remember that this follows three sisters. Their fourth sister, a twin to one of the others, went missing when they were very, very young, and naturally this has deeply affected their family. And in the present day, they've all kind of moved on. They've gone their separate ways. They are somewhat estranged a little bit because the two older sisters almost never return home, and the youngest sister, who was actually the twin of the girl that went missing, stayed back in their Louisiana hometown to help take care of their grandmother, who essentially helped raise them. And back when they were young, at their old house, they buried a time capsule, and they all vowed to come back in 25 years and dig up the time capsule and relive memories and stuff like that. And so it has now been 25 years. The two older sisters are returning. They are coming back, and naturally during this time, secrets are going to be revealed and things like that. Honestly, I cannot tell you almost anything specific that happened in this story because I just don't remember it. I didn't find this to be a very compelling read. I didn't care about any of the characters, and almost all of it just kind of went in one ear and out the other. So I guess that's the biggest takeaway if you are interested in reading this book, is that I really don't think that it's a very memorable read. I don't think a lot of the stuff that happened in there was particularly well done or shocking or surprising. It was a book that exists, and I read it, and we are moving on. The next book that I read, I actually did quite enjoy, and I was surprised by that because this is definitely a book that is outside of my comfort zone. The book is called The Devotion of Suspect X by Keigo Higashino, and this is a mystery that I believe was translated originally from Japanese, and I read this for yet another reading challenge to read a piece of translated Asian fiction. So this follows several characters. One of our main characters is Yasuko. She is a single mother raising her teenage daughter, and 5 years prior to the start of the story, she left a really toxic, kind of like emotionally abusive marriage, and she's been trying to avoid her ex-husband ever since. But one day he surprises her and he finds her. And so when he actually follows her back to her apartment, she's quite surprised because her teenage daughter is there with her. And when he threatens her and he says he's never going to leave her alone, and he starts putting his sights on her teenage daughter kind of takes action and bonks him over the head with something. But unfortunately, this does not take him out. And so when he kind of gets back up and he's going after the daughter, he's being physically violent with her, Yasuko takes action and she ultimately kills him. What she doesn't know is that her neighbor, Ishigami, has kind of heard all of this stuff. Now, Ishigami is a very quiet person, but he is very much in love with Yasuko. And so when he kind of hears the commotion go down, he surmises what has actually happened because he is actually a mathematical genius. He's currently teaching students mathematics, but he could have done so much more with his brain if he wanted. And he essentially offers to help Yasuko hide the body. And he does. He takes care of the body, and he comes up with alibis, and he creates this very genius story that he did, kind of trying to fool the police. And you're also following Detective Kusanagi, as he is the lead investigator when this body is found, and he's trying to determine what actually happened to the dead body. Naturally, of course, Yasuko is a suspect because he was her ex-husband, so she's very much on the police's radar. But this is also following a professor of physics. I can't remember the name of the institution that he is a professor of physics at, but essentially, he often consults with the police on some of their cases, and he was actually a classmate of Ishigami. So when he finds out that Ishigami is tangentially connected to the this case, he is curious and he thinks that there is something more going on. So he kind of takes the opportunity to investigate on his own. And so this is kind of Ishigami and the physicist in a battle of wits, kind of a chess match, if you will, as Ishigami is trying to keep them off the scent of both himself and Yusoka. And I actually thought that this was a very clever mystery, very, very well done. I didn't see the twist coming at all. This is one of those twists that I think that you have to really be examining every piece of information in order to figure it out, because for me, it was completely out of left field. I did not connect the dots at all. I did not see where that twist was coming from. And so I think that this is one of those really more intelligent, clever mysteries that you really have to be focusing on and paying attention to. Otherwise, you're not going to get it. But when you look back, you do see that really everything was there to lead you to the conclusion. You know what I mean? I ultimately settled on a 3.5 stars for this just because I do think that there is oftentimes a disconnect in translation. And I felt kind of very distant from the characters. I didn't connect with any of them. There was no emotion involved. This was very much for me kind of a very straightforward piece of detective fiction. And even though I really enjoyed the story overall, I didn't emotionally connect to it. Didn't quite make it to a 4-star, but I did really enjoy this more than I thought that I was going to. The next book that I finished in the month of February was Pictures of You by Emma Gray. This was my very first experience with Emma Gray, and it will not be my last. I very, very much enjoy this piece of contemporary fiction. So this follows our main character, Evie, and at the very beginning of the story, she is waking up in the hospital, and she does not know why she is there or how she got there. Not only does she have memory of the accident that put her there, but she doesn't have memory of the last 13 or so years of her life. When she wakes up in this hospital, she believes that she is still 16, but in reality, she is 29 years old, she is married, and her husband has been killed in the accident. This absolutely floors her because as she is leaving the hospital and trying to figure out what has happened, she's realizing that the person that she is at 29 is vastly different from the person that she thought she was going to be at 16. She is also learning that she's very much estranged from the people in her life that she cares about. Her parents aren't in her contacts anymore. She's not talking to her best friend Bree, but she doesn't remember her husband. She has no feelings for her husband. She doesn't have any love for her husband. And she's at Oliver's funeral, and all of a sudden she decides to kind of do like a runaway bride situation, and she takes off, she splits, and she gets in the car of the person she thinks is her Uber driver. But it turns out he is not her Uber driver. His name is actually Drew, and he has a very big connection to Evie. Now, Drew is also somebody that Evie no longer really has any connection with, and there's obviously a reason behind all of this stuff, right? And you are finding out the reason for this through the story. So you're following Evie and Drew in the present day as Drew actually works to help Evie figure out what is going on in her life, because Drew knows all of the things that Evie is missing. Drew knows why Evie is no longer in contact with her parents or her best friend or even himself. And then you're also flashing back to when Drew and Evie first met, as well as Oliver and Evie when they first met. And it's all going to come together in the present day. And I very much enjoyed this story. I was definitely more connected to the present day perspective between Evie and Drew. I'm always a little bit disjointed when I'm so invested in a present day perspective, and then we're thrown back in the past and we try to have to orient ourselves to what is happening at that time. But eventually I got there and I started to also enjoy the past perspective. Now, I will say that this was a little bit different than I was expecting, and I don't know why. I don't know if the synopsis led me to think a certain thing or if it was maybe just my interpretation of the synopsis, but I was kind of under the assumption that Evie and Oliver were in like a good marriage, and so losing Oliver was going to be devastating to her once she realized it, and then Drew kind of comes back into her life and helps her put the pieces back together. But it wasn't that way at all. In fact, as we're kind of going through the past perspectives and stuff, and as Evie kind of gets her memories back, we're learning that Oliver was a very toxic and emotionally abusive person. Part of me wishes that that hadn't been the case, because I thought that made it a little bit convenient for Evie to move on from Oliver and to go into Drew's arms. But like I said, I did really, really enjoy this story for the most part. I rooted for Evie and her relationship with Drew. I enjoyed following that and uncovering all of the things that Evie had forgotten. It was just a really interesting journey, and I'm just looking forward to reading more from Emma Gray in the future. The next book that I picked up in the month of January was A Sea of Unspoken Things by Adrienne Young. Now, y'all know how much I was highly anticipating this story. It was one of my most highly anticipated releases of 2025. And I don't want to say that I'm disappointed by this story, because this book definitely had some of the things that you come to expect from Adrienne Young. It was very atmospheric overall. It had incredibly beautiful writing, but I feel like so much more could have been done with this story. I think this book was also missing some of the trademark things that we come to expect from Adrienne Young, and ultimately this is another book that was really not what I was expecting. So this follows our main character, James. She is currently a successful artist living in San Francisco, and she has a twin brother named Johnny. They both grew up in this very small rural mountain town in California, and James pretty much fled when she was 18 after something pretty traumatic happened to them, right? And she really has never looked back. She's never come back or anything like that. Now, Johnny and James are twins, and so naturally they have a really intense connection, even though they've kind of been somewhat estranged for a little while now. But James has always felt when things have happened to Johnny and vice versa. And Adrienne Young kind of wants you to believe that this connection is more than just the standard twin connection, right? She's trying to give you the impression that this is more of a supernatural connection. So unfortunately, one day, Johnny is found shot dead in the woods. He is currently working on this kind of like conservation project. He is out in the woods and he is shot and killed. And everybody believes that it was just an accident, that this was just a rogue bullet from a hunter or something out there. But James thinks that there is something more to it. So she returns to the hometown trying to kind of settle Johnny's affairs. Naturally, there are things there that she would rather not face. There are people that she hasn't seen in 20 years, including an old flame of hers who also just happens to be Johnny's best friend. But she is there also trying to figure out what actually happened to Johnny. Now, this book, in my opinion, lacked the magic, both figuratively and literally, of other Adrienne Young books. And I really don't want to say anything more than that, but all I will say is that things really are not as they appear within this story. In full transparency, almost nothing happened for the first, I want to say, 60% of the story. It was a very, very slow moving story, and that doesn't necessarily always bother me, but I found that it was making me a little bit bored, that I wasn't connecting to the story, I wasn't connecting to the characters. I didn't fully start to be really interested until around that 60% mark, when I feel like James's investigation into what happened to Johnny fully started to take effect. But ultimately, the reveals were just very, very lackluster. I definitely predicted at least one of the reveals that was happening in the story. I would say that for the most part, this is just your standard mystery with an atmospheric twist. And based on my experience with Spells for Forgetting, based on my experience with The Unmaking of June Barrow, I just thought this could have been so much more. So ultimately, like I said, I did rate this book 4 stars because it does have beautiful writing. It is really atmospheric, and I do feel like for the most part, it will stick with you, the overall story. It was just so incredibly slow paced, and ultimately the mystery was just lackluster. So like I said, I still gave it a 4 stars, but I was definitely expecting way more. Next, in the month of January, I did end up finishing Empire of the Damned by J. Kristoff. I'm not really going to say too much about this because this is the second book in a series, but essentially this follows our main character, Gabriel de Leon, who is the last Silver Saint, which is basically an order of vampire hunters. In this world, vampires are real, and a major event called Day's Death has occurred where the sun is no longer out in the sky, which basically causes vampires to run amok. This world is essentially now run by vampires, and Gabriel is part of an order that is determined to take them down. Gabriel de Leon at the start of Empire of the Vampire has been captured by one of the main vampire families, and the historian that is in there with him says that his master wants Gabriel de Leon's story. So you're getting the story in Empire of the Vampire and Empire of the Damned. I loved Empire of the Damned way more than I remember loving Empire of the Vampire, but I did do a disservice to Empire of the Vampire by listening to that rather than physically reading it. So I was able to get more fully involved with the characters and the world. This book is very dark. There's a lot of gruesome things that happen in here. It is also very long. There's definitely a lot of action scenes, a lot of fighting and things like that, but I just love this. I gave this a 4.5 stars, and I'm very excited to read the conclusion that is supposed to come out in November. Next, in the month of January, I ended up receiving a wish list gift, and so I went ahead and picked it up immediately, and that was Variation by Rebecca Yarros. This is actually her newest contemporary romance, and it was just fine. This follows our main character, Alessandra Rousseau, who is a very well-known, very talented ballerina. Essentially, she comes from a very long line of very well-known, famous ballerinas, and this is her love story with Hudson. They both met when they were teenagers. Hudson lives in the town where Alessandra's family kind of owns like a vacation home. Hudson, who is a rescue swimmer, ends up rescuing Allie and her younger sister, who are out in the middle of the ocean with like a sinking little boat. And so he rescues her. They have a connection. They end up having a really strong friendship for a couple of summers, but then something tragic happens and they haven't spoken to each other since then, right? So now, again, Alessandra is a very well-known ballerina, but she is recovering from an injury and she has to go back to her vacation house. And this is where she reconnects with Hudson for a very specific reason, and that is Hudson's niece, Juniper. Juniper is convinced that Allie is actually her mother. She was adopted when she was a baby, and so she thinks Allie is actually her mother. So she seeks out Allie. This causes Hudson to get in the middle, and it goes from there. This actually then leads into kind of a fake dating story between Allie and Hudson, because Juniper really wants Alessandra's help, because Juniper wants to be a ballerina, but her mother, Hudson's sister, will not allow that. She is adamant that Juniper never be in ballet. And because Juniper's mother absolutely hates the Rousseaus, she thinks that if she could just get to know Allie, that she would change her mind and allow Juniper to dance. And so they kind of go along with it. And it's like a fake dating situation, but naturally Hudson has always had feelings for Allie. Allie has always had feelings for Hudson, and it's just gonna kind of go from there. Ultimately, this was fine. I really enjoyed the side plots, right? I enjoyed the whole situation with Juniper trying to learn about her birth family, trying to con her mother. I also enjoyed learning about Allie separately from Hudson, like learning about her family and the secrets that were going on in her family. Like her older sister had a baby and she never ever knew about it, right? Her mother, who is absolutely awful, has been hiding these secrets for all of these years. And so I enjoyed those aspects to it, but the actual relationship was probably the most boring thing about this story, and that is not what you want to see when you're reading a romance. I also thought, considering the fact that Allie and Hudson have been estranged for more than 10 years at this point, and there's a very specific reason why they are estranged, and it's a pretty serious one too. I thought that they were able to kind of pick up where they left off pretty quickly, and then they were ultimately able to let themselves have feelings for each other pretty quickly as well. So ultimately, I never really connected to the relationship in here. I did give this a 3.5 stars. It was fine. I don't necessarily think it was meh or forgettable, but it was also not what I'm looking for when I'm going into a romance, right? And I really want that chemistry. I really want to feel the passion between the characters and stuff like that. I didn't get that from this story. Sorry for any angle change. I had to change my battery, but unfortunately this battery is also not fully charged. I'm afraid it's going to die before I finish this video, so I'm going to try to run through the final books pretty quickly. So the next book that I ended up picking up was Divine Rivals by Rebecca Ross. This is a book that is going to be February's pick for the Bookworm Bitches book club, and it came in from my library, so I wanted to go ahead and get it out of the way. This is a story that I'm really conflicted about in terms of my thoughts and feelings, because first of all, I don't think that this book knew what it wanted to be. It was this really interesting mix of historical fiction, romance, and fantasy. So it's kind of classified as a historical romantasy, but the fantasy parts in this story are very light. Reading this, it was more like a historical romance. This was set, I believe, in like the late 1800s, and there is currently a war going on, very similar kind of like to World War I, although this is a war between two gods. And this follows our main character, Iris, and her older brother has actually gone to the front lines. He is going to fight for one particular god. And in the meantime, she is there taking care of her mother, who is not handling her son's absence very well. She's an alcoholic. She's not functioning. Iris is there taking care of her, and she wants to be a writer. And so she is going to try to work for a local newspaper as a columnist. But she is actually in competition for this spot with a boy by the name of Roman Kit, I believe was his name. She calls him Kit. And so at first, it's very much like a rivals hate situation, right? But deep inside, Roman actually really likes Iris. He's very intrigued by her. And ultimately, Iris actually decides to leave the newspaper and go work as a war correspondent for a rival newspaper because she wants to go and find her brother. But what's also happening during this time is that she's kind of typing letters to her brother and sticking them in her wardrobe for safekeeping, but those letters are actually being sent to somebody who's receiving and responding. And that actually causes Iris to build up a communication with this mysterious person. So we find out pretty early on that it is Roman who is receiving these letters, and Roman knows who Iris is just based on the information that she's putting in these letters. But of course, Iris doesn't know that it's Roman on the other side of this. We also come to find out that the reason why they're able to do this is through two kind of like magical typewriters. This is kind of one of the only other fantasy elements to the story are their magical typewriters. And for some reason, Roman decides not to reveal his identity to Iris. So it's very much a you've got mail situation. And when he finds out that Iris is going to be a war correspondent, he decides to follow her. And so it's also about their developing relationship as they're also going to the front lines. They're reporting on the atrocities of war, and they are essentially falling in love. So here's my thing about this story. I think that it was wonderfully written, and I like the overall premise of it because y'all know how much I love a you've got mail trope, but I don't necessarily think that this was very well done because first of all, I feel like the communications between Roman and Iris were very brief and very few and far between. And yet we are supposed to believe that Iris is falling for this person that she doesn't even know. I did not buy that at all. Also, at least in You've Got Mail, you know, when Tom Hanks realizes that he is communicating with Meg Ryan, he actually gives her an opportunity to fall for him outside of their communications, right? He knows it's her. She doesn't know it's him. They are hanging out and she is is starting to fall for him. That doesn't happen in here. Iris finds out that Roman is her mysterious pen pal, and by that point they've had some time together, but they haven't had nearly enough time to actually build romance or love, but yet all of a sudden they are in love and they are getting married. It went from 0 to 100 very quickly, and I don't feel like we had an opportunity at all to actually connect or invest in this romance, right? And I thought that this would be better served had the relationship only started to develop at the end of Divine Rivals and then been more developed into Ruthless Vows. Now, my understanding of Ruthless Vows is that Ruthless Vows is when it leans more heavily into the fantastical side of things, and the romance is just a side plot of that. I don't know, maybe Rebecca Ross wanted the relationship to be fully formed because she needed that motivation for Iris to try to save Roman for the situation he finds himself in at the end of Divine Rivals. I am not entirely sure, y'all, but all I know is that I'm really conflicted over this story because I was expecting so much more from it just based on the reviews that I've heard about it, but I thought that it didn't know what it wanted to be. It was trying to be historical, it was trying to be romantic, it was trying to be fantastical, it was trying to do all these things, and I think it really should have just focused on 1 or 2 rather than 3. I don't think Rebecca Ross did a really great job of developing the relationship or convincing me that these two should be together. I think that the communications between them could have been far more substantial and far more in-depth and drawn out, and then we would have been able to connect with their relationship both through the correspondence and then when they are actually together on the front lines. I was really expecting to love this a lot more than I did. I will be continuing in Ruthless Vows because I've heard Ruthless Vows is so much better, and I'm really excited to see how the fantastical elements are more well developed overall. I want to go ahead and finish out the series now that I've started it because I want to see if Ruthless Vows is actually going to live up to the hype of the series, if that makes sense. All right, and the very last book that I actually completed in the month of January was It's One of Us by J.T. Ellison. I feel like I kind of read a lot of duds in January. There were very few books, if any books, up until this point in January that I really fully connected to and just was excited to read and invested in what was happening. And so I kind of felt a little bit slumpy. I didn't know what was going to happen. I just knew that I didn't want to jump into another mandatory read. So I went ahead and picked up something that I thought could be a palate cleanser, something that's been on my TBR ever since I first learned about it in 2023, I believe. And then of course it was It's One of Us by J.T. Ellison. This is an author that I had no experience with. I really knew nothing about her. All I know is that this is another one that was put on my radar during one of those monthly new release videos, and I thought the synopsis of it sounded really, really interesting. So this essentially follows a married couple, and their names are escaping me, but I think the wife is Olivia and I think the husband is Park. And at the very beginning of the story, Olivia is suffering from her 6th miscarriage. Now, please be warned about that because infertility actually plays a huge part in this story. Their marriage is kind of on the rocks. They've been having a lot of infertility issues, and like I said, at the very beginning of the story, Olivia is literally going through her 6th miscarriage. And after all of that takes place, she goes out into her kitchen to find 2 detectives there. And the 2 detectives are there because there was a woman that recently disappeared. It was somebody that Olivia was an acquaintance with, and her body has recently been found. And on her body was DNA. And that DNA actually led to Park, not because Park is the suspect, because it's believed Park is the father of the suspect. Now, of course, this throws them both for a loop because they obviously don't have any children. But it turns out that the perpetrator of this crime is actually Park's son. And we come to find out that when Park was in college, he donated sperm, and that sperm led to fathering over 24 offspring. So of course, Olivia is not thrilled with this, but both she and Park are on the cops' radar with regard to this crime. And it doesn't help that Park himself has actually been connected to other deaths and disappearances in his past, namely a girlfriend that he dated in college. So there's kind of 2 facets to the story. We are trying to figure out Park's secrets because he's obviously hiding more secrets. And we're also trying to figure out who this person is that is killing women because ultimately another woman ends up going missing. And you're following multiple perspectives. You are following the perspective of Olivia, who is known as the wife. You are following Park, who is known as the husband, and you are following a few other perspectives as well. You are also following a young girl who happens to be Park's daughter, and that girl's mother, who was the sperm recipient. You know what I mean? So you're definitely following a lot of different aspects of this story, and you're following how it's all connected and stuff like that. I had a great time with this thriller. This will definitely not be my last time with J.T. Ellison because this was so incredibly interesting and compelling from page 1. And what I really liked about this story was that J.T. Ellison did a phenomenal job of balancing the complex family drama that was going on in here with the thriller elements to it. The thriller was ultimately the catalyst to everything else that was revealed in here, so it is very much a prominent part of the story. It's not just a backdrop to the story, but at the same time, at the forefront is Olivia and her marriage to Park and everything that they've been through and their messy relationship and Olivia's former relationship with Park's twin brother Perry. So there is a lot going on here. There's a lot to unpack, and I just thought it was very interesting and well done. Now, I will say that the whodunit part was very easy to predict. I predicted the whodunit the first time this character was put on the page, but at the same time, I don't necessarily think that it was meant to be a surprise. Rather, what was meant to be compelling about it was the unraveling that it causes with the other characters in this story. So I just absolutely loved how JT Ellison was able to weave this story. I found myself compelled equally by all of the characters and what was going on. And I've always found it really interesting, the idea of sperm donors who have children and those children are trying to find their donors for reasons just as simple and basic as trying to know their medical history. And so I think that's what really drew me to this story. And I thought that JT Ellison did a really great job of bringing this unique concept to life. So like I said, I had a fantastic time with this. I gave this a solid 4 stars, and I'm very excited to read more from JT Ellison in the future. All right, y'all, and the final book that I want to talk with you about today was the last book that I attempted in January, but unfortunately I didn't finish it, and I know that this is going to be a wildly unpopular opinion, and a lot of people are going to be really upset by this, but the book that I DNF'd was Black Cake by Charmaine Wilkerson. This was the book club pick for my Paw Prints and Prose book club over on Patreon. This came in from my library, the audiobook, so I wanted to go ahead and of course listen to it before the audiobook had to go back. I was really excited about it because I had heard literally nothing but amazing things about this story. Now, I do want to quickly say that I don't think this book was poorly written, and I actually thought the premise of this was very intriguing and compelling, but ultimately it was the way that the story was structured that really didn't vibe with me. So the catalyst of the story is that we have 2 siblings, Byron and Benny, and essentially Benny has kind of been estranged from her family for a while because she and her parents had a falling out. They didn't really approve of Benny's lifestyle, and she hasn't really been back to see them in 8 years. And since that time, their father has passed away. She didn't even go to the funeral, and now their mother has passed away. And so she is going back to their hometown to kind of settle their estate and meet up with her brother and everything like that. And it turns out that their mother has made a recording with her attorney, and it's full of a lot of secrets that she's been keeping about her past that she really wants her children to know. This starts with them watching the video and hearing the start of their mother's story. Now, first, what I'm going to say is that this is definitely a meandering story. Of course, you wouldn't be able to get a full novel if this woman came out and said, here's what happened, this is what I need you to know, and this is what I need you to do. It definitely does not do that. It meanders. So we start the video, we're starting to hear about the story, and then bam, we're thrust back into 1960. We're following characters we don't know, and instantly I'm taken out of the story and I'm not able to connect with what is going on. I hate when jarring transitions happen like that, because here I am in the present day, I'm invested. I want to know what this woman is hiding. I want to know more about Benny and Byron and their dynamics together. And then all of a sudden, I'm thrust back into a historical perspective, following characters that I don't know. And not only am I following characters that I don't know, but I'm also following people in her life that she is connected with who have their own perspectives, and it jumps around a lot. There are a lot of characters in here. Now, by the 30% mark, I really had a solid understanding of who all the players were, and I was able to keep everything straight, but I still found this to be very slow, very meandering. It's not always told in a linear time frame, and sometimes I felt like we were having characters' perspectives that we really didn't need to have. I really wanted to focus on Benny and Byron in the present, and then Covey, who was the main character in the past perspective. I wanted to follow her and what was happening to her, but yet at the same time, we would be jumping to Covey's best friend, we would be jumping to Covey's father, we would be jumping to all of these other characters, and I just didn't care. And even as we got further into the story, more and more new characters were being introduced. There were just too many, and sometimes the perspectives were so short, they were like only a page. So you were never really given an opportunity to connect to these characters and really fully stay with them and understand what was happening. I just found that to be a very jarring and disjointed reading experience. And there were also scenes in the story that absolutely did not need to be there. They were literally there just for the author to make pointed social commentary. And I distinctly remember I was listening to the story and I checked to see how far I was, and I was only at 53%. I felt like I had been reading this story for actual years and I still had almost half of the book to go. I ended up listening another 4% when I realized that I just cannot do this. I am bored out of my mind. I literally don't care about almost anything that is happening here. I need to be more emotionally invested in the characters. I'm just not vibing with this story. And so at 57%, I was over halfway through this book. I DNF'd it because I was not having a good reading experience with it. And I was literally angry that I still had like 43% of the book left. And that just tells me that this book was not working for me. This book was not what I wanted to be reading. And this book was only going to serve to put me into a slump if I continued reading it. I set this book down. I immediately started another book and I love that book. It was exactly what I needed to pick up. So I don't know, maybe I wasn't in the right mindset for Black Cake. Maybe if I had picked it up at a different point in time, I would have enjoyed it better. But I don't think that I would have ever been able to vibe with the way that this story was told. But it is what it is. All right, everybody, I have been rambling for just about forever at this point. Please comment down below and let me know if you have read any of the books that I've read in January and what your thoughts are. I would love to know. Or if you've made it to the end of this video and you are not feeling chatty, go ahead and leave me a vampire emoji in honor of Empire of the Damned by Jay Kristoff, which was easily the best book that I read in January. And as always, if you like this video or if you just like me, please be sure to give it a big thumbs up and subscribe if you haven't already. I typically post 2 videos a week, one on Wednesdays, one on Sundays, and I would love to connect with you in any of those future videos. Or if you would like to connect with me outside of YouTube, you can always find links to my Goodreads, Instagram, and Patreon linked down below along with any books talked about in the video. Until next time, y'all.